Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salam, hello, peace to you all, and welcome to Office Hours, the 13th edition of our weekly Friday live stream. We try and do it every week. Occasionally we miss it, but we're back again for our regular live stream to talk about what's going on in the world and to have your comments and questions and be able to engage in this developing community and this public educational project. I always get excited because it's a wonderful opportunity at the end of the week for learning, for discussion, and engagement. And if you really like that sort of thing, share it. Make sure that your friends, comrades, even your enemies know about this live stream so you can like the stream, get it boosted on the algorithm, share it on social media. If you're watching on Twitter or X, as some like to call it, you can retweet it. But if you want to participate in the discussion, come into the YouTube chat so that we can engage with you and have more of a sense of discussion and seminar. This is going to be a really great episode, a really great edition of Office Hours because it's a very important topic that gets so little attention and hardly has anybody who really has the deep background and knowledge and what I would say is an anti-imperialist framing that's so important, that's so rare. We are very lucky that we have today Hamza Al-Muqawi, a writer, activist, person who established SudanFunds.com, is involved and has really developed the anti-UAE boycott for Sudan. Welcome, Hamza. It's great to have you on Office Hours.
Thank you for having me, Adnan. I really appreciate it.
Well, I've been looking forward to this, and I tweeted out for everybody and included it in the link in the description for people to go check out a very important article that really puts many things together for people. Sudan at the crossroads of empire, revolution, counter-revolution, and the UAE's sub-imperial ambitions, which is on your Substack. And I think we're going to talk a lot about this, but also generally, and we welcome people's kind of comments because we recognize that so little of this has been covered in, the mainstream media in a serious and deep sort of way, which is what we like to do, is look at it historically and in depth. That people should go and read that. It's very important and a really valuable piece. So, but kind of starting off, a lot of people are not very familiar with Sudan as a country, as a place, its geography, about its history, and we need some orientation, to get people, to have a sense of the context before we come to the more contemporary situation and the sort of news and how to interpret what's going on. I'm wondering if you could maybe give listeners and watchers to this program a little bit of the sense of Sudan's economy and geography, sort of historically in the modern sort of era, and its position geographically, and why it's such an important. You make the point, in your article, that it is absolutely a vital geopolitical location. It's strategic. It's a hinge between what we would call the West Asia and the Arab world, and the rest of Africa. So there's so many kind of key factors. I'm wondering what you would tell us by way of sort of introduction to give people an orientation about Sudan as a place, its people, and maybe I'll follow up and ask you a little bit about the history. But why don't you just give us a little bit of a description of what kind of a territory we're talking about? A vast, huge country.
Yeah, of course.
For those who don't know, tell us about Sudan.
Yeah, so Sudan is a country in northeast Africa. So already, we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but it's already a huge country as it is, like in the mod, like how it is right now. And that's already after South Sudan already split from it. So it actually used to be even bigger. It's just absolutely huge. So on maps, if you look on maps, Africa's looks smaller than it actually is, like in comparison, because the way maps work, some things have to be smaller than they are.
You
But
mean because of the colonialist Mercator projections and so on? Yeah, that's right. They wanna
yeah, I
make
mean
us think we're small.
like it's the perspective has to be a certain way, but they definitely chose which ones to make. Like you see South America, it just looks absolutely tiny compared to like Canada and Africa. Give me 1 second. Sorry.
No problem. We're
Yeah.
on the move. This is,
Yeah.
office
Sorry, I just have
hours style.
to. Literally office hours. Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't think anyone was still here, but it's okay. Okay, so it's absolutely a gigantic country. In the south, there's a lot of oil, and in the north, there's a lot of gold and different resources, and it's a very fertile country. Very fertile country. Like could feed many countries all by its own. They literally say in other parts of Africa, like in my home country, Morocco, if you drop a seed in Sudan, like out of your pocket, it'll just grow like without having to do anything to it. Like that's how uh, fertile the land is. That it has these kind of sayings about it. It's also situated on the Red Sea. Um, it will come into play later. I'll talk about that as well. It's across from the Gulf countries, from Yemen and Saudi Arabia and the UAE and that whole area right there. It's under Egypt, so another important country right there. It's next to Ethiopia. It's next to Somalia. Um,
It's
it's
it's on the Nile, right? I mean, the
yeah, it's
Nile
on the
is a
yeah.
large par stretch of the Nile is through Sudan. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the Nile. The Nile runs across all of Sudan as well, and so that's also a very important river, of course. And it's on the Red Sea, and it's connected to North Africa. It's touching Egypt from the bottom. It's connected to East Africa because it is in East Africa, and it's in the Horn area. So the Horn of Africa, you can access it from Sudan, and it's also connected to West Africa as well. In the Sahel. And it's easy to access the Sahel from Sudan as well. And like Nigeria is literally touching from the bottom. So it's literally right in the middle of all the action, all the important things that are happening. Is It's right there, basically.
Yes. So that gives it, significance and importance for those who want to have control over these really crucial waterways going through the Suez Canal, connecting, the Mediterranean and markets of Europe with the, Indian Ocean and trade that flows through there. We recall and remember how important, the Evergrande, a tanker running aground in the Suez, and it caused
Yeah,
like absolute, devastation for the global economy and shipping because they had to go the long way around. So the entire Red Sea region, we obviously are very aware also of, the role that Yemen has played, significantly in its blockade of Israeli shipping and shipping to
right.
Israel. So this is also relevant, as you're pointing out, that it's on the Red Sea. It's also
Yes,
really,
absolutely.
really relevant. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna talk about later, and like I also mentioned to you the other day when we were speaking. In my opinion, like some of the most important places that have been very contested about, and that's because of geography, is a big part of that. Is Sudan, Yemen, and Palestine.
Mhm.
Palestine connected, like it's touching, it's next to Egypt, so it's like kind of right there between Africa and the Middle East and the Levant. And then you have Yemen on one side on the Red Sea as well, and that's kind of like a key point for the Gulf countries, and you have Sudan on the other side for Africa, and they kind of form a little triangle that there's just been so many conflicts of imperialists trying to take all three of those over, because whoever holds those three, like you can effectively control an entire region and multiple parts of multiple continents with those three countries. But we'll get more into that later. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I just want to remind listeners you can like the stream, share it. We're at the start of this conversation. So now's a good time. Don't be miserly, as I like to say. There's a good thing, very important discussion happening. Share it with people. And also, I just want to acknowledge that it's of such importance to be talking about Sudan right now and have this opportunity to learn more with Hamza, that we are not only streaming on my YouTube channel and X account, but also on East as a podcast. So East as a podcast listeners, welcome to you. And if you don't know about my channel, you can also subscribe, and there's a lot of great, things that we do here on Office Hours. So come on in. And also, it's so important that typically we don't, put the live streams on the podcast channels, but it will be both on my podcast, if you're just an audio listener afterwards, and on East as a podcast, because we really feel it's so important right now and so valuable to have this chance to really talk in a significant way about Sudan. So the history. In this important article, and I think you begin with this because these are the foundations really for thinking about the contemporary situation. You have to take into account this history. You really started with the colonial era, the Anglo-Egyptian. Of course, during this period, Egypt was under colonial control in the late 19th and early 20th century. Egypt itself was under control of the British, and they used the resources of Egypt, their control over Egypt, to extend their power into Sudan. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about, because it's actually not a well-known history. I mean, there were resistance movements that took place to the Anglo-Egyptian control over the Sudan in the late 19th century, the famous Mahdi, right? There was a uprising. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that late 19th period of the colonial era in Sudan, and what its kind of consequences were, and the kinds of resistance that developed, that maybe we can think that there are some continuities in some ways between resistance at the end of the 19th century to colonialism and our own contemporary era. What was going on then?
Yeah. So basically, that was the you guys will see how this will mirror a lot of what will also come up with Sudan in what happens after this point in history as well, which was kind of uh, the British colonizing Sudan for the British Empire, just like many places were at the time, but through Egypt. Like it was under Britain, and then Egypt was also under Britain, but Sudan was kind of under Egypt, under Britain. Like it was kind of like what are those things called? The nesting doll. It's the nesting doll situation of colonialism, nesting doll. So
So
um,
Sudan was like subcolonial, like you've been talking about the
yes,
subimperial.
yes, yes, yes. It was subcolonial. It was. They outsourced a lot of what needed to be done to control Sudan to Egypt. So they were a different, like, loyalists to the colonial British in Egypt. There's always a bourgeois that sells out their people and their nation and their land for some money or for some comfort, and they're used to control the population on behalf of the colonial people. And Egypt, those those bourgeoisie kind of acted in that way for the British. It was kind of a headache for the British to keep going back and forth from Sudan, but still, even I'm pretty sure Winston Churchill, one of his battles that he had fought in when he was a soldier was in Sudan as well, to quell one of these rebellions, and they took some heavy losses at the time as well. Like they did not like the fighting that they had to do in Sudan. They gave them a really hard time. But yeah, so it was basically the Anglo Egypt took over Sudan. So it was under Egypt, but then it was under the British, like we said before. This was a very important period because it was one of the first times where, first of all, it was the first time where Sudan was like officially under European colonization. Before that, it was the Ottoman Empire. Before that, it was Arabization. There was a lot of processes that happened before that. But even with Ottoman conquering and with Arabization, which in its own way, that those have their own issues and stuff that we can talk about another time. But European colonialism and conquering was a unique evil that when you come in contact with it the first time, and once they find out about you, you don't really get out of their grips. They will find other ways to continue to keep that up. So yeah, since that time, basically, Sudan has not really had any time where they've been free. I mean, they've had independence, but it
Right.
wasn't
Like,
really. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you point out that like the classic direct colonial rule, was from 1898 to 1956, and you characterize in your article it's a period of colonial style extraction. And we can then talk about after 1956, is it, I mean, it may be an independent state, but does it really actually have full sovereignty in the world system? It's neocolonialism and imperialism. We can get into that, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about like what was the kind of form of economy, and what it was, this colonial extraction. What were they trying to extract from Sudan during this period under the colonial rule?
Yes. So you're right. That's the part that I was about to go into that next. So first of all, there's a lot of resources, like I was mentioning earlier. There is cotton in Sudan. There's gold in Sudan. There's different minerals in Sudan, and there is, like mentioned, which is this is very important, is the cause of a lot of people that come after, or a lot of uh, imperialist states and organizations that come after Sudan is for its ability to grow food. It's a very important resource, especially now we're about to go into maybe potentially climate change causing some food scarcity, and that will be mentioned later as well about the UAE. But right now we'll stick with this. So basically, Sudan was basically turned into a factory for resource extraction. So all those resources that exist in Sudan, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head everything, because it really is a lot, but I don't want to be wrong about what it was exactly, because I was also just talking about the DRC, and they also have a lot of resources, and some of it's kind of meshing in my head a little bit. But yeah, so cotton was a big one. Gold is one of the biggest ones. That's still one of the biggest ones today, and other different minerals and kind of things, and labor. There's a lot of people. I mean, right now it's before the war was 50 million people. So even back then, for back then, it was a lot of people. So it was a huge labor pool as well. So it was labor extraction, resource extraction, and they basically just made Sudan a very efficient place to take things from. So even after independence, that didn't really change. It's just the faces changed into a Sudanese face, and it was still the same type of setup. Just like a lot of places that got independence, just turned into a neo-colonialism with like a puppet regime that colonialist place that basically just answers to them, and you guys can take all our resources. That's fine. Just let me run my little scheme here in my country and just steal from my people, and be corrupt and all that. But yeah, so from the Anglo-Egyptian colonization of Sudan into the independence time, it just became a resource extraction factory, and that just stayed after independence. That was the economy setup. It was for like exporting, and not exporting for profit for Sudanese people, like just exporting stuff as efficiently as possible, as much as possible, like trying to just suck it dry. Um, and it just kept being run like that. Like even there's been multiple coups, multiple different like government switches, different dictatorships, and every single one has just been the same. They just run the same kind of resource extraction, um, just with different faces and different recipients. And at the end, the West is always benefiting from this, no matter who's the one that's running this.
Yeah, you characterize this period from 1958 to 2018, as military capitalism and the security rent state. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit. What did you mean by, this military capitalism, and what is how would you say are the main features that you were noticing that describe something called a security rent state? Like, how is that working?
Yeah, so Sudan has been under military dictatorship for almost entirely its entire independent time has been under some form of military dictatorship, and for the last huge portion of the time it's been the same organization, which is what the UAE propagandists today like to attribute to the Muslim Brotherhood global organization. When it really, I mean, there some tiny ties with some of the people that were in the army leadership, but some of those people were also the ones who we'll talk about later were helping Hamas and PIJ political bureau and fighters and commanders find refuge in Sudan, and some Sudanese people who are involved with Muslim Brotherhood were before this happened, like in the 2010s and the early 2000s, would help Hamas spread out their investments and help them protect some of their interests and that kind of thing, because they were under siege in Gaza, and they didn't really have any way. And when But this security rent situation, when they started exporting violence as well, and they would also use violence on their own people, these military dictatorships, to keep things in order. Like they wanted to keep running this resource extraction factory, and some of these pesky proletariat people who are starving to death, or can't even find opportunities, or the only opportunities they can find is to be thrown in a gold mine or to be made to work to extract some resources for other people, started rebelling. And there's different ethnic groups, there's different tribes. There's Arabi Sudanese, non-Arabi Sudanese, there's people who don't speak Arabic who were also persecuted for other reasons as well, because it that was also part of the hierarchy. And they say these dictatorships were Islamist, but honestly, any like there's so many other governments are also called Islamists that are really just they just slap any name label on there. Whatever type of dictatorship we can run that can help us have this partnership with the West to help them extract more of our resources, while we get to uh, be corrupt there. So there was multiple rebellions. First of all, the most famous one is the SPLM, which was the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, versus the Sudanese government. The Sudanese government is basically a military government. It has been for a very long time. This person was Omar al-Bashir, who is a former dictator of Sudan. He was, I think, for 30 years, maybe a little more than 30 years, but I know it was at least 30 years that he was dictator of Sudan. And he had the SAF, which is the Sudanese Armed Forces, which are basically the government and also the army at the same time. So it's a military dictatorship. And the SPLM that's what would become now South Sudan at the time, was part of Sudan, and they wanted independence from Sudan. Most of them do not speak Arabic. They're also more dark skinned than the ones in the north. There's a lot of things, and this will be also used by Western humanitarian organizations. I mean, sometimes they say we just want to simplify things to make it more digestible to the Western viewer, but sometimes they just straight up lie or use weird framing that's not really true to make people understand, because Sudan is a very complex topic. It's a lot. It's a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving variables and a lot of things happening at the same time. This military dictatorship that I was talking about before, that fought with SPLM. In Sudan, they call them KZN. That's what this. So today, you might even, if you go into Sudanese spaces between Sudanese people, you'll see people get accused of being KZN or KZN supporters. That's what the Ahmed Bashir SAF loyalists were called, basically. They're called KZN, singulars, because, and this is what today, what the RSF, which we'll get into later, use as their justification for what they're doing, is they say, oh no, we're just rebelling against the Kazan, we're rebelling against Ahmed Bashir, just secretly still runs Sudan, and his people are the ones who are still running Sudan, and we're just trying to liberate our people from that, yada yada yada. But this same RSF is the same one that when first with SPLM, that was the SAF fought them, but they committed a lot of atrocities against those people. So this muddied up the SAF's image in the global order, and the Sudanese government looked terrible. So for the next thing, which was Darfur, in Darfur, people started rising, and there's different ethnic groups there who are also not the majority in Sudan. Um, they didn't want to use SAF because if they used the army directly, then again the same thing that would happen that was happening with the SPLM thing, which is still ongoing, but it was like on and off, basically. So they used these people, these tribal people who are in that area, who know the areas very well, who had already created some form of militias, but they weren't like official militias at the time. Some of there was like the Arab gatherings, they were called, who got some funding from Gaddafi under his like pan Arabist phase. There was a couple of other like different groups who would just like cross the border from Chad, for example, to just attack like Sudanese farmers. So these are criminals. We're talking about gang members. We're talking about drug smugglers. We're talking about people who were just camel herders or sheep herders or stuff like that, who would steal other people's livestock and bring it across the border back to Chad, or would do it in that area of Sudan. They didn't really have a village. They didn't have a tribe, nothing like that. They were just kind of like nomads in that area, but they knew the area well, and they were already they had no connection to the Sudanese government. So that violence, now we see this again, the violence is outsourced. The violence is outsourced to Egypt before, now the violence is outsourced to this group. And there was no official group. It was just different groups of people. And in the beginning, the Sudanese people used to call them Janjaweed. Now, most people don't know what that means. Janjaweed literally means, in Sudanese dialect Arabic, devil on horseback, or devils on horseback, because they would come a lot of times on horseback or on camels to come attack villages, basically. So these unorganized, different crime syndicates and different like tribal people, like if you it's really similar to who Israel tapped to be their collaborators in Gaza, against the Qassam brigades and against the honorable resistance, which is, you know, drug dealers, like Bedouins who aren't like, who are doing crime things, or some of them were not very good at crime. So it's like, yeah, come to us here. You could collaborate with us. You can help us, because they want to use the face of those people that are in the area or that are from the area. So it could be like, oh, it's just between them. They're fighting each other. That's like, you know, one of the most common like colonizer tactics. Like, just use them against each other and have them act as your proxy, and then it'll just look like it's a civil dispute between them instead of like an outside or foreign interference. But yeah, so they went into Darfur to they were supposed to just crush this rebellion basically for Ahmed Bashir, but they just, you know, burnt down villages, killed and massacred so many. They committed atrocities of, to this day we still don't know everything that happened there. I mean, Darfur just hasn't gotten that much peacetime since that time. It's been just on and off for that area, especially. But these people, this Janjaweed, these tribal people would eventually become who we now know as the Rapid Support Forces, as the RSF. And just the fact that some of them were from that area and they immediately turned against their people for money, like those were the kind of people who were joining the Janjaweed at this time. And this will become this will stab the Sudanese government itself in the back, because if you're a higher bidder, the kind of people that would join the Janjaweed to begin with were very much ready to turn on you if you're paying out more. I am so sorry. If I can just pause for like 15 seconds to grab my laptop charger, because I left it in that other room.
No problem. No problem.
So sorry.
Thank you.
Give me
Yeah.
1 second. I'll
No
be right
problem.
back.
Yeah, this gives me a chance to remind people that they should like the stream. Make sure that you've given this a like, share it if you can on X, on other social media platforms, so people can come across it and subscribe to the channel. We're also on East as a podcast if you want to be part of the discussion. If you're on X or watching on East as a podcast, it makes sense to come into my channel, the mainstream, the Adnan Hussein Show, because then you can be involved in the discussion. And I want to say, while I'm seeing some activity there, it'd be great if people had questions. I know there are questions out there. If people had specific questions for Hamza, that would be great, because we have this opportunity to talk with somebody who's very knowledgeable about the situation in Sudan, and let's use it. So if you have questions, throw them into the comments on my channel. I'm taking a look at them, and we'll pose them. So again, like the stream, and share it on social media, so other people can come across it. So Hamza has gone to get his charger. He'll be back in just a moment. I'm seeing also suggestions that Against the Stream podcast did a great episode this week on Sudan. I wonder who the guest was. I'll have to go check that out as well. And I wish I was able to keep my calm more often. Lots of situations come up, unfortunately, and get me so upset that it's very difficult to be so measured. I'm trying to be, when I have a guest, that they can, really bring the analysis and the fire. But I will just tell you, I was recently at a few meetings where we're attempting to divest, part of BDS work, and it is so difficult. But after 2 years of genocide, and you're still dealing with people who, will argue over minutia, to try and raise obstacles to actually doing what's right. It's so disturbing, at this point. And I can imagine, Hamza, you feel, much the same, that, it's even worse in a way because it's just been ignored. The what's been happening, but you were just telling us, I think, a little bit about really how to think of these RSF groups as and I thought that was a very interesting comparison that made sense to me immediately, that when you see the kind of environment in the Sinai and parts of Gaza that have been collaborated, kind of in this sort of no man's zone, you end up with drug smugglers, black market bandits, and you can even have people who are kind of ISIS type oriented as well. Like, they
I was gonna
all
say
become a
that it's
mix
always
that are perfect for collaborating in sowing greater chaos, in undermining popular resistance and popular mobilizations that are attempting to try and, on behalf of the people, improve the conditions and situation. So in addition to this kind of portrait of who these RSF types are, perhaps you can also link it to like who they're collaborating with, which is something I know you want to discuss and talk about: the UAE's involvement in sponsoring and paying and basically turning these people into mercenaries against their own people. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about how the UAE has managed to capture, and what's their purpose and point. What are they attempting to do in supporting
yeah,
and sponsoring the RSF groups?
absolutely. So okay, so from where we were, which was around 2004, 2005, I think, which is the Janjaweed group that we were talking about, right? That tribal militia, they did such a good job at the massacres and the genocide that they committed in Darfur that they became an official fighting force for the Sudanese. We will get to the UAE. You'll see it. It'll be right there because like professional mercenaries. That's what they were. They were professional mercenaries, not for the Sudanese state, for Omar al-Bashir. And Hemeti was Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. He's the leader of the Janjaweed, and now he's the leader of the RSF. His nickname is Hemeti. Now, this is a rumor. I don't know if this is the reason why his name is Hemeti. He was always called Hemeti. That's always how I was introduced to him. That's how always other people have known him. But people say it's because he used to be called Hemeti, or My Protection, by Omar al-Bashir himself. Hemeti in Arabic is my protection, so that's where Hemeti comes from. It's my protector or my protection. And he even had gifted Degelo a gold mine for himself, just for his great job in genociding Darfurians. He gave him that, and basically, the RSF was just always just used to just do the like the SAF's dirty work that they couldn't do openly, right? So it's kind of like the secret wing of the army that wasn't actually part of the army. And in 2013, they officially became the RSF, as we know, the Rapid Support Forces, and became like an official thing. And the UAE needed people to fight in Yemen for the Saudi coalition. So the Saudi Arabia and the UAE, their little duo. So other than all the ISIS people and the Takfiris and all the different um like extremists from all around the world, anyone that basically wanted just to sectarian people, anyone who wants to just pick a bone with some group that they didn't like and had a lot of issues and just wanted to go shoot a gun somewhere. They're like, yeah, please come, we'll give you money, we'll let you into Yemen. And they also requested from a lot of different like puppet regimes and for help for different mercenaries because they just did not have the force capable of taking and holding Yemen and fighting people who are familiar with the area, who are familiar with the mountains. I mean, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Gaza have been always those three places that have been almost impossible to control for a long period of time. They've always been a place that, if you're familiar with the area and you're from there, the native people would always be able to either win and defend their land, or even if you do successfully take it over for a little bit, they end up kicking you out, and they always end up being able to resist. So Yemen is one of those places, as we know, and we know they were fighting Ansar Allah at the time and fighting the Yemeni revolution. So that's another part of this, which is the UAE being a counter-revolutionary force along with Saudi Arabia. So there they were the second in command to the Saudi Arabia as part of the Saudi Arabia coalition. The UAE, when it first started, it was those 7 states in Amman that were like they were. I mean, it was just Ammani desert. It wasn't. The UAE is not a real country. There's no Emirati culture. I mean, I'm pretty sure the whole country has maybe like 50 of them at this point. I mean, they're like a very, very a minority in their own country. They have to bring in labor forces from. Well, labor is a nice word. A lot of slavery. They take people's passports, they offer them really nice jobs, and then they take their passport, the kafala system, and they just have them trapped there basically for years and years and years.
Well,
So
we know, I mean, just on that point, I mean, we know that those small principalities and political enclaves were carved out during the era of British colonial rule, in first to serve their purpose of controlling, the trade and access to India, through the Persian Gulf into the Indian Ocean. It was seen as absolutely vital. There were also a lot of resources to exploit. There was a lot of pearls and pearl diving, right, in the Arabian Gulf, the Persian Gulf, places like Bahrain, Qatar, etc. But what they want, especially once they discovered that there were a lot of oil resources there, they didn't want these resources to be under the control of larger scale political powers who they could use those resources on behalf of sovereign development of the society as a whole for many people. So they concentrated in the hands of a small kind of ruling kind of family elite, and in order to sequester those vast resources from the rest of the population and the people, like, so that's clearly part of the kind of game and the strategy. But I like also how you were pointing out that the place of the UAE and Saudi in Yemen is very parallel to their ambitions and the pattern of their involvement in sponsoring mercenary type forces, in fomenting this chaotic conflict. There's a lot of parallels between what they did with the forces that they support in the so-called Yemeni civil war. It's like really outside intervention. And that's also how very often it's framed within, as you were pointing out, in Sudan, as it's like, oh, it's just these people can't get along. And in fact, they then manufacture kind of simplistic narrative that this must be the difference between Muslim populations and non-Muslim populations. Or if that doesn't work, then they say, oh, it's the Arab and versus the African populations. Or they say it's the, this or the, and so they use this kind of like frame to kind of make the focus be that there are some kind of ethnic or religious differences that is how to explain and understand this conflict that's taking place, and not have any of the sense of how these external forces are pumping in money, guns, and all of that to feed this kind of chaotic situation, to allow them to undermine. And this is something I do want to ask you more to elaborate on, to undermine popular forces. Like you pointed out in this, that this is counter-revolutionary. Counter-revolution implies there were revolutionary forces that have to be undermined and stopped. And maybe you can talk a little bit about these resistance committees, what happened in 2018 and why that was so threatening to, these imperial powers. That would be, I think, valuable for people to go back to that 2018 period and really understand from you, what were those revolutionary forces and why they had to be stopped and how they are being undermined today.
Yeah, so this is definitely a counter revolution. That's always how I framed it. It was a direct response to the 2018 revolution. And it when, as we just talked in Yemen, when the UAE needed people to fight there, Sudan had sent the RSF. So they met the Emiratis there. So this is how they get to know each other, and they basically see them doing a counter revolution very well. They're like, wow, these people are very good mercenaries. So we're going to keep that in mind for later. We're going to see it come up. And then the 2018 revolution happens. The RSF is sent out as to basically like they sick them on the Sudanese people. These were a lot of, it was all normal people. There was no like organization, huge organization or something like that, or like a NGO that was setting this up. There was no election that set this up. There was no liberal democracy that they were just like, oh, we have to, it was people just were tired of the small ruling class in Khartoum getting everything, while people couldn't even afford bread. People, they say it started about bread, but that's a very small part of it. Like this was, as I mentioned in my piece, it was, Sudan was a very good example of necropolitics, where people were basically colonized. People are left to live just like a certain way. You're allowed to live how we allow you to live. You're allowed to live just enough to be alive, but not enough to actually prosper in any way. But you're technically alive. So when people stand up and they try to fight back, they're like, "Wow, you're dumb. Why are you fighting? You had a good life before. You were alive, at least. You weren't in war. You weren't going through this thing." And that's the thing that you were just talking about, which is they act like, what, 50 countries just want to go to war all of a sudden, all the time. There's always 30 countries at war. Naturally. Like there is definitely no outside force that's like creating chaos and inspiring chaos, and divide and conquer. But also, like, if countries with a lot of resources stay destabilized and chaotic all the time, it's very easy to just take the resources out without any trouble. If there's no organized government, if there is no, it's either has to be a puppet regime, or once the puppet regime falls, civil war immediately. There's always something that happens there. And the RSF was already used as a counter-revolutionary force, first in Darfur and then against the Yemenis. And in Libya, they were used to help Haftar's forces, which is another militia that we're going to talk about later as we talk more about the UAE's proxies. And then in 2018, they were used by the Sudanese government against the Sudanese people. Once they saw that these resistance committees, which was basically just normal students, revolutionary students who just wanted to make their country better. They wanted to liberate their country. They knew that they were still under colonization, and they needed to not only free themselves from Omar al-Bashir, but free themselves from the Western hold that the West has on them, basically. So there was these resistance committees, uh, who are in every state. There's a resistance committee, and then there's in every city there's also a resistance committee. So these were normal youth groups that were just basically grassroots led, that took care of their people. So at this time, when the very little things that the government was might have been providing was taken away as punishment for the protests, they took care of themselves. When the soldiers were shooting at people in the streets, people were their own medics. They took care of each other. Mothers and uncles and aunties and everybody were cooking for their neighbors and making sure everybody got fed. And this was the start of the community kitchen that we know today, which is every neighborhood has a kitchen of just volunteers who cook food for the community, for the neighborhood. They take care of each other. Um, and there's also the emergency response rooms, which is another part of this. So it's the resistance committees and the community kitchens and the emergency response rooms. These are all like working class led, like from the grassroots, from the bottom up, um, orgs and setups to help their own people. They have like they create their own makeshift medical facilities. They were helping bring food to people in the front lines of fighting the army during the revolution. They were like treating wounds like rubber bullets and tear gas and that kind of thing. And they were learning as this was happening, and they were setting up this infrastructure which would later be crucial. Actually, if this didn't exist, there'd be way more deaths right now during this genocide. There's already so many, but these infrastructures that they created during the revolution to be revolutionary continue to be used to this day. Um, so when the Sudanese people, who had one of the worst dictatorships in this region, and the Arab Spring had already all but basically failed, anybody who actually overthrew anyone, they just immediately like punished them by putting somebody who's worse. They'd give them like 3 seconds of democracy and then just be like, okay, military coup, let's just put this guy that we like, and he's just gonna throw all of you guys in prison and it will never happen again, basically.
Yeah, Mubarak to Sisi,
Yeah.
basically, with a blink
Yeah,
of an eye in
literally.
between. Yeah.
It's either that or they just like they would just push, they would use it to put proxies every different. It was like the race for Africa, where that picture, that famous cartoon with the cake where they're like dividing it up. It's like that, but every Arab Spring country, just it was just all the different sub-imperial states, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, each one backed their own proxy, and they were like, yeah, let's just rush and try to take pieces of this country and just take all these resources. And while they had those people fighting each other, they're just like sneaking stuff out of the country, and using their proxies to control parts of these lands. And they even, the responses to the Arab Spring, which caused now what's happening in Libya with Haftar, and also what's happening in different areas of like in Tunisia and play in Mauritania and stuff like that. Places like how do I say, the instability created and what it allowed for there to be put there by Gulf countries is now also used to back up the counter revolution of Sudan that's being carried out by the RSF today. Like Haftar, it has backed the RSF. He allows them, well, not allows, I mean, they're his backers. They tell him what to do, and he's like, okay, cool. There's a route where the Colombian mercenaries that get sent into Sudan from all the way from South America, ex-military, most of them, they get hired by a security company in the UAE. They're brought over there, and then they're shipped out to Libya, and then they take that road down from Libya into Sudan, and they all join the RSF from there, under like with a UAE salary, an Emirati salary, basically. When the RSF and some of the army smelled in 2018 that El Bashir was finished, there was no way he was gonna get out of this one, at least publicly. They turned on him. They did that thing that they did with Hosni Mubarak, for example, where they're like, okay, now the army's cooing you. We're gonna overthrow you, and we're gonna carry out the will of the people. But just like 15 seconds ago, they were shooting at the people. They're just looking out for their best interests, and that's what happened here. So the RSF and the SAF both survived the revolution. They were part of the next stage as well, which was the transitionary stage. Ahmed Bashir was ousted. He was arrested. He was thrown in prison, and there was supposed to be a transition to civilian rule. And during this, the SAF still had power, the RSF still had power, and then there was like a civilian branch. So there was these three branches basically that were all together in this new government. It was supposed to be transitioning to fully civilian away from military rule. I mean, of course, that never happened. It was stopped in its tracks. But because Sudan had such a brutal dictator, and such a brutal like regime, if that fell successfully and stayed like fallen, and the people actually took control of their country, Egypt would have Egyptians would have rethought their situation. Maybe Libyans under Haftar rule now would maybe rethink their situation. Moroccans might rethink their situations. People in Saudi Arabia or the UAE might rethink their situation. You know, it would inspire a lot of revolts worldwide. I mean, the Arab Spring started with one Tunisian man setting himself on fire in 2011. There's one person caused this chain reaction that put such a like caused such a headache for colonial powers and the Gulf countries who worked so hard, and like that one caught them off guard. But now it seems that they have set up contingency plans for each of their puppet regime friends, like mercenary groups, different militias, different parts of the army, different maybe intelligence agents and that are part of the government's intelligence agencies who will help them carry out the counter revolution. They don't want to get caught off guard again. Like they got caught off guard in 2011. Some of the revolutions actually succeeded, and they immediately rushed into action to shut it down and put their own people in there and then lock it down forever. And that's why they were kind of felt like they were prepared for Sudan. They rushed into action, and in 2021 Hamdouk, who was part of the leader of this like civilian branch, he was supposed. There's this party called Tagaddum. They're supposed to be a good. Tagaddum means progression, so it's supposed to be this good progressive party that lets them transition into civilian rule. But then Al Burhan, who is the current leader of the SAF and basically leader of Sudan, and Hemeti or Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, the leader of the RSF, uh, overthrew him. They overthrew him in 2021, and they took control of the country. And it was basically just fully whatever transition to civilian rule that they pretended that they were going to do was just gone. Um, and they had another transitionary government now where Burhan was the leader and Hemeti was basically his vice president. He was vice president of the Transitional Sovereignty Council, I believe it was called. And the official story that's used by Western media is that, well, they couldn't really agree about the power sharing because that was 2021. By 2023, the genocide starts and the war breaks out. Um, so yeah, that's the story that they're able to use. They say it's two generals. They're like really like mad at each other. They're two Sudanese general, which it's funny because Hemeti, the leader of the RSF, he's not even Sudanese. He's from Chad. He grew up in Chad. Uh, I don't know when he came to Sudan. The only thing that's really known about his background is that in fifth grade he was expelled from school and never went back for stealing a goat or a sheep of some kind. So that's the kind of person that leads the People's Revolution that they claim on their social media propaganda. Um, but Burhan, the leader of the Sudanese armed forces, wanted the RSF to be under the army or to integrate in the army. Hemeti didn't want that, and even Hemeti, even before all this was happening, when he was the vice president, he would say things like, the Zionists, I feel so bad for them. They have to deal with the Palestinians. They go on khutbah for a Friday prayer. They make the sermon where they say, "Oh, this guy was killed and this guy was killed." All lies. Like he was running cover and game for Israel in Sudan, which is a very anti-Zionist country even back then. It was very clear where his loyalties laid. He's there for the money. So when they took control, they were the ones who signed the Abraham Accords for like to what's that word again? Normalize relations with Israel so they can get the sanctions lifted. Like Hemeti, I'm sure, was a big part of making that decision. I mean, the sanctions were suffocated, and that was true. And which, by the way,
But wasn't that situation? I just want to come to this because I think I
yeah,
remember that after there was the democratic, revolutionary, popular, against Bashir, um, the U.S. kept and maintained its sanctions on Sudan, and distributed funds that they had seized and been holding, because of the 9/11 families. I don't know if you recall this. Like, there were all these resources that they could have sort of released to allow this new government, a new transition process that was based on a popular and democratic kind of, uh, you know, politics to succeed, by solving some of the economic problems. I mean, you mentioned that it started with like bread riots, but it mainly just means that like everything, the cost of living was impossible. People couldn't survive. They could have helped do that, but instead they distributed all this money to the 9/11 families. And it has then produced the conditions that you were just describing that totally undermined any possibility for a path forward, and where people then just were susceptible easily to these mercenary kind of salaries from the UAE to exploit, and overthrow counter revolutionaries to those conditions. So that seems to be related to in a couple of questions that we got in. You've been talking about the UAE sub-imperial role. I'm sure we'll have to return to that at some point to keep continuing our analysis, your discussion of that. But we had one question that came in from Danny Ferguson, 9415. What is the role of the USA with regard to Sudan? And that reminds me also that there was a question from Ode to John Trudell: how much CIA work has created the chaos in Sudan? In other words, what is the super imperial kind of story? We had the sub imperial with the UAE. Is there what's your sense of the super imperial kind of involvement in Sudan, and or at least in the situation that has resulted in Sudan?
So it seems like, okay, a couple points to that. Well, for the USA. First of all, for what, like, in if we're talking about in the sense of kind of how the USA is to Israel. So the UAE is that to the RSF, but the UAE isn't really a real actual power on its own. It's just kind of like an Arab face for the different Western powers, right? But in this case, this would be actually the UK, the British government. They're more involved there, and they actively like went after people who tried to expose the UAE early on about what they're doing in Sudan, and they covered up a lot for what they're doing as well. The EU was also heavily involved in they helped arm the RSF before this started, because they were offering them border control where they would basically stop Africans from crossing up past Sudan. Um, so a lot of weapons that were not that didn't come from the UAE actually came directly from the European Union. But then the United States specifically, I mean, they give a lot of weapons to the UAE. They have a huge military contract. They make like a new one every year that's even bigger and larger than the last one. That's the ones that there's ones that they're selling to them. There's ones that they're giving to them for free. I'm sure there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes that we don't see. This genocide was going on in Sudan, and it was becoming increasingly obvious that it was the UAE, and people were, I mean, let's not pretend like Biden was any kind of like a moral person, but like he didn't even pretend to be. Like this was brought up by Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs for months now in Congress, where she talks about how the UAE, like not months now, months before the UAE came, the delegation came to the US to meet with Biden in September 2024. So this was like said in the American government, in American politics. So it was known that the UAE was doing this, but he still created an even stronger and bigger military contract, and they even signed a document where they said we're strengthening military ties with the UAE, which doesn't seem like a coincidence. Israel, who's America's proxy in the region, was early on October 2023. I think we saw videos. I remember when these videos first came out from the RSF, it was noticed that they were like using these launchers that kind of seemed like to me and to some other people online like they were the LAR 160, and it did end up, we're like 99.9999% sure that those were Israeli. they're created in Israel. Only like 6 countries have them, and none of those countries are like countries that would sell them to the RSF because they only have like 3 or 4 of them. And in Israel, so it's yes, there's a very small chance that they might have maybe sent them to the UAE just for the UAE to use, but chances are that Israel probably send them to the UAE to be sent to the RSF. They want a piece of the Sudan pie when this is all said and done. So many people just create new contracts with the UAE. So without saying, hey, whatever you get of Sudan, whatever you guys get to keep, uh, give me a little piece since I'm helping you out with this. Like you guys need some weapons. There's some European countries who have been caught with their pants down in Sudan as well, like French armored vehicle technology, like technology that's very hard to get unless it was literally given to someone and it was found in RSF armed vehicles. That's from France. Very expensive, like defense stuff. Sorry, I don't remember what the exact technology was, but I do know that it was like a huge scandal when it first happened. There was Belgian weapons in Sudan with the RSF. There was different. So it just like the U.S. never like openly showed that it's being involved in Sudan, but obviously they were the ones choking Sudan to begin with the sanctions, right? Which they claim it's because the Omar al-Bashir government helped Al Qaeda, and like that's what they say. But he was overthrown at this point, and they kept them
That's
going.
exactly
Like
the
you said,
point, is that they got rid
yeah.
of that government and yet they still kind of maintain the sanctions, you know? Yeah, that's right. But what you're saying is a very important and useful point. It's a different kind of analysis where we often think that, oh, we have to see direct US involvement in order to, have an anti imperial perspective. But in fact, actually, what you're pointing out are all these sets of interlinking kind of nodes of the imperial power that are operating in conjunction or in some kind of compatible sort of way where the US doesn't have to actually be as directly involved because the allies that it has are acting with the resources that it's been that's been given to them, or they use the financing of the UAE, but they use like um, various groups, like we were talking about, those that I think that was very important about the collaborators. And if you look at the kind of collaborators in Gaza and who is being supported and financed in Sudan, and likewise these mercenaries who were involved in Yemen, and you see a real pattern where there's a more systemic kind of set of relationships that are reproducing this chaos and serving counter-revolutionary forces in the region. So Complath 2203 had said, oh, I wish there was some visual aid or interactive map showing all the imperial neo-colonial links and the groups they fund and unleash across various regions. It would be so helpful. I agree. I think that would be so helpful to have a visualization of it. But I think what you've been describing and talking about and making all those connections is the verbal version of exactly that kind of an interactive map. All these different lines of connection that you need to have in order to really make sense of what's been going on. So I really appreciate that. We had another kind of question earlier, which was about, and keep them coming, folks, in the chat. I tried to get to them. Another question that had come up is like, what's been the role? I'm trying to look for that specifically so that I could post it, but it was basically about what's been the role of the African Union. Have they said or done anything? Are they really making the situation worse? What can we look to from the oh, here it is. Okay, here was the question from Red Kitty. Is the African Union playing any role in Sudan? Mediation, interference? What? Is there any story related to the African Union in this?
I mean, just like every other organization that's like that, there's a lot of statements of concern. They're very concerned. We're concerned. There's concern. There might be some concern as well. I think that they've shown every time some big massacre happens, they're very concerned about it. But there is no mediation. There's nothing like that. I mean, said that they would help with negotiating if they wanted two warring parties want to come to the table and negotiate. But most of the African Union, like they know what's happening, and not just that, a lot of them are in on it now. So one of the very early on, it was I think December 2023 or maybe January 2024. The leader of the RSF went on a Africa tour. Like he literally visited so many different countries on an Emirati plane. It just picked him up from where he's hiding in the UAE, and he met with the Kenyan president. He met with the South African president. He met with I think the Ugandan president as well. He met with the guy from Puntland, the Puntland president in Somalia, and the Bosaso, not Bosaso, Bosaso is Somaliland, sorry, uh, so-called. I'm not gonna act like I'm an expert on what the Somalia situation. In my what it seems like to me is that it seems like it's like a bunch of different semi-sovereign states within Somalia that are all like Somalia, but then there's kind of like presidents of regions. So seeing two of those regions work with the UAE on this. And this Africa tour was before, like it was right before 3 or 4 months before the season on Fetcher started, which lasted from April 2024 until it fell in November of this year. And before a lot of the offenses, the major offenses that the RSF were about to start doing. So it seems like they were getting ready to, like the UAE was getting ready to launch the second stage of their plan. The first attempt, what it seems like to me is that in April 2023, the RSF was supposed to coup the SAF or whoever leadership was there. Anyone that would have been loyal to them in the army would have just joined them, which did happen, and they would have just overwhelmed the people in Khartoum, and they would have just taken over the government, and that's it. There would have been no war. Like I think that was the original. It was just supposed to be like a surprise attack in April 2023, and they take over. They try to take over the Republican Palace and Khartoum as a whole. And it seemed like they believed that if they did that, and they just took over that, like all the government buildings, then they would just become the government. That's it. Like there would be no more. That just didn't happen. There was some, So then second stage was like just start fighting and just try to take as much territory as you possibly can, and they actually did have a good amount of Khartoum state for a while. They had uh, a lot of El Gezira state for a while as well. El Gezira is very important, very important. A big thing behind this whole thing. The Sudanese government, even the corrupt Sudanese governments, were like refusing to sell like large pieces of the El Gezira scheme, which is some of the most fertile land on like planet Earth, to the UAE. They wanted to buy it permanently, like not lease it, not rent it. They just wanted it, and they didn't want to sell it to them. And so they've just been trying to take it. They they've just been trying. They try to buy it. They try to like trick their way into it. They try to scam their way into it, and now they're just trying to take it. That was like one of the during this, like around the same time as this Africa tour, that's when they went into Wed Medani, which was the second place after Khartoum to be like a displacement. Like all the people from Khartoum ran away to Wed Medani, which is like the biggest, one of the biggest cities in El Gezira state. As he was going on that Africa tour to talk with all the Africa Union people and try to have some backup, basically, that's when that part of the plan started. Like I said, it seems like their coup failed, so they just started like a long like war of attrition kind of thing, and just trying to take as many territories as possible. And it was obvious that for the first place was they just wanted political dominance. If they could take over the capital, maybe they could just the government would just fall and they could take that over. So that's why they targeted Khartoum first, and they wanted a lot of the infrastructure that was there that was for the government and for the army, which is really centered in Khartoum state, and then there's Khartoum City, which is the capital. Um, so Khartoum State also has Omdurman and other really important places. Like they want to take over they took over the broadcasting service that was like the belonged to the state before, that kind of thing. Um, the next thing was like when they took over a lot of El Gezira state successfully for a while. They got pushed out. Recently they got pushed out. The SAF, the Sudanese army, was able to push them out of that area. So the UAE has failed in that part as well. But the reason I say that it seems like that Africa tour was to start the next part of their plan is because, like for example, they made a parallel government like an RSF government. They want to create their own Sudanese government. They're like announcing it. It's like how there's like the Yemeni government, and then there's like some guy in like some other country, and he's like, no, this is the real Yemeni government because we're recognized by the UN or whatever. Like they just think that they can just announce the government on behalf of the imperialists, and everybody just has to,
Yeah,
you
like
know,
a Juan Guaido situation in
yeah,
Venezuela, like let's just pick some guy who suddenly will claim that he's the legitimate president and use that as a base, or what they're trying to do now with Machado. So it's like a imperial kind of strategy that we've been seeing not only in the West Asian and African region, but like they're ready to do it also in other parts of the imperial kind of game board, as it were. Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. Wow. Interesting. Well, I want to come to, you've alluded a couple of times about more recent events. Um, More recently, there's been some attention on the situation in Sudan, partly because of, as you're saying, the fall of al-Fashir and the, kind of really horrific conditions that people are suffering, with, as a consequence of that as well. But I'm wondering, what would you say about what's happening right now? Tell us about what you've been hearing, what your sources tell you about, these conditions, and what's been happening in recent weeks, basically, as a consequence of those military events in Sudan.
yeah. So um, first, so El Fasher has been a very important place for the RSF, and they've had it under siege since April 2024 until like just almost the entire city was starving. Basically like in full famine. Like multiple stages in, like not even the early stages. Like it was very bad. People were eating animal feed, and even that was starting to run out. Uh, El Fasher was basically the last place in Darfur that wasn't RSF controlled. Darfur is the only place that the RSF actually controls. So they have taken over the rest of Darfur from April 2023. They just started picking up the pieces, like little by little, massacring all the minorities, and I mean massacring everybody, really, truly. But like with the like they really didn't leave anyone who like isn't who they deem like worthy of like staying alive. Uh, so this mirrors the situation that happened in El Ganina in 2023 in Darfur, and they were chipping away at El Fasher, trying to have it drop. That attack that caused it to fall was, I think, attack maybe 245 or 246 attempts by the RSF, like 246 pushes that the Sudanese joint forces, the tribes, and the army had successfully been able to push back and hold on to El Fasher. So the thing I mentioned before with the parallel government, that was announced in Nairobi in Kenya. So those were the kind of things that they were setting up in those meetings when they had Hemeti flying around different African countries. They need different African governments to give them some form of legitimacy. But to have even a parallel government, you need to at least have one state. Like you can't, they didn't even have one state fully. Like it's just a bunch of, if you look at the RSF control maps, like it's just a bunch of like different random dots just all over like SAF controlled territory. Before it was more, they controlled more, but they've just been pushed out of every single other area. So really the only stronghold that they really have anymore is Darfur. And to give any form of legitimacy to maybe having like a dual governed Sudan, or splitting off an RSF controlled area as their own country, which I'm sure they're trying to do, which we could get into more in a bit. Um, they have to control Darfur. I mean, they have to control Darfur to at least that can be their capital, and their where they launch from, and a place that they fully control and they could operate out of. Niyala Airport in Darfur is where all the weapons come into from the UAE. They either go through Somalia, through the Puntland, or through Somaliland, and then come there, or through Chad, where they also had bought that president. Like they gave him a loan of basically the entire country's GDP. at once, and he just allows them to use Amjidas, which is a place in Chad, as a they say it's a hospital to get and like an aid center for Sudanese refugees. If it's a very small village, like there's barely even any people from Chad there, much less Sudanese people. It's really just it's a military hospital to heal RSF fighters, and it's also it was it used to be the hot zone to get weapons into Sudan. But now that they control Darfur, they started using Niala Airport, which is like there's an airport in that city, Niala, and that's actually the RSF government's capital now. So they were able, yeah, they announced the parallel government in Nairobi, and they needed that last piece. They needed El Fasher. Like they started shelling it every single day. At by the time it fell, already like 250 or I think more healthcare facilities, hospitals, that kind of thing were all absolutely just obliterated. There's like one maternity hospital that was literally bombed and like 140 people died. And then there's only one hospital that was really kind of still standing, and that was the Saudi hospital in Fasher, which, if you guys might have heard, as soon as the RSF took over, they went in and with taking videos, just basically shot everybody in their beds and just killed them all on video. Yeah, so I would say what my sources on the ground are telling me, but my sources on the ground were, I mean, were the people that we were working with our aid network to distribute food. Unfortunately, ever since it fell, I have not heard from any of them. Um, I I think I think we know what probably happened, to be honest. Like the first people that they went for was like doctors, and there was a former member of the Sudanese parliament who is from El Fasher originally. She came back to El Fasher under siege to run her own community kitchen and pass out food and help people. They walked into her house and shot her. Uh, that was like day one, hour one. And apparently, from what I've heard from some people who were able to get away into Tawila, which is like 40 miles away, that's another city. That's like the closest city that people can run away to. They were saying that they were going into all the people who were running the community kitchens, who were working with aid organizations, who were passing out food, and they already knew where they were. Like they already had intelligence on this. They were watching for a very long time, and they basically went to their houses one by one and just executed them. So, I mean, yeah. So
That is really disturbing to hear, Hamza, because, and for you, especially, knowing these people, working with these people to be cut off, that's very, very disturbing. In your article, you said that one of the political, or maybe the main political lesson is analyzing, the sub-imperial ambitions of the UAE and the way they're operating, that, accountability, you say, can only come from confronting not just the UAE, but the broader imperial architecture that enables such interventions. Um, that's really true. That's also a long-term project. That's like not just one location. It's how they're all feeding off one another to produce this kind of chaos, mayhem, just genocide and starvation and deprivation. The story you've been telling, it just sounds so much like what we know from Gaza. It sounds so much like what we know from Yemen. It's just being repeated over and over, this pattern. Um, I know people, when they've heard all of this, really want to know what they can do, how they can help. Um, Ode to John Trudell had put it, so there's no end of the killing in sight, no hope for the peace for the people. People feel really despairing when they hear about how much people are suffering and how terrible the situation is. But I'm wondering if you can maybe give people some concrete things. You've been involved in a lot of initiatives, these kind of mutual aid, those kitchens. Maybe you can talk a little bit about where you would direct people. I mean, there had been a question early on, like what are some organizations, what are some initiatives that we might be able to support, at least to do something. We know, just like in the Gaza situation, I mean, it's not, you want to see an end to the entire genocidal violence, it's very hard. We keep doing our political activism, but we hear about these people who are suffering, and we want to do something. What can we do? um,
Yeah, of course. So I just want to intro this with, first of all, this same person right here, Ode to John Trudell, has another comment as well where it says, "Why kill the people who help others? Make no sense about that." And this is something that I have always highlighted, that an important front of the war on Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, and as people who claim to be supporting the resistance and supporting the people of Gaza, people very much neglect, I feel like, on the internet, where they're seeing these campaigns for people who need help, and they just kind of go like, well, that's not, this is a front of the war, just as the fighting, the military part is a front of the war. Just like the information campaign is a front of the war, is a very important front of the war that actually like shapes the reality on the ground as well. Food is a weapon because starvation is a weapon. They use starvation as a weapon, and I always say this on my Twitter, and I always push this, that when you are helping people in Gaza, when you are helping push campaigns, when you're help even creating a campaign for somebody and helping them fundraise and helping a family or two families or five families or 10 families or whatever survive and eat, when the enemy, when the axis of evil uses food and starvation as a weapon, tries to kill people with by starving them, to put pressure on the resistance to give in or to take a deal that's going to end in the genocide of their entire people, or like starvation, that's why he's using it faster to make them give up as well. Food, like this was, it's being withheld. So giving them that food or giving them access to that food or fundraising for people or mutual aid is just as legitimate as a form of fighting as any other form of resistance as well. And I literally like to call the people who help us with Gaza and with Sudan with helping people get fed. I like to call it the support front or the support brigade. Like we are like the resistance was already worrying about so much. They had so much on their plate, and the fact that they even have to think about the fact that their people are starving above them while they're fighting and protecting their homeland, like that's something that we could help with. Like we could directly help them by at least lifting some of that worry away by making sure that people are fed, making sure as much as possible that we can get these campaigns in front of as many people as possible, get people help as much as possible. Like people would hit us with appeals with for our aid network, which I'll talk about a little more in detail right now. And we would like tents, food, ingredients, things to cook with, the pots and pans. People left everything. Like most people's homes were destroyed in Gaza, for example, and they would need to start over somewhere else with absolutely nothing. People sleeping in the street, especially towards the end, before this so-called ceasefire. The resistance ceases and Israel continues firing as usual. Um, People were being like pushed into the south, and they were being forced to sleep in the streets. So if any resource that we could help with, like we would be helping with. Like even some people, we helped them get their hands on like very like cheap tablets because there's only remote learning in Gaza, for example. There's no schools. All the schools are absolutely destroyed, and they want their kids to still to join that remote learning classes. Like there's teachers I follow from Gaza on Twitter who are still teaching through Zoom and through Skype and through different things like that. So I bring that up to say that when they killed those people because those people were resistance fighters, just like the people from Al-Fashir who were resisting with guns. The people who were resisting by keeping their people alive were directly facing the war of starvation head on and pushing it back. Like that's also a form of fighting, and just like so
Yeah, just that the point is that just like we see in Gaza, enabling these brave, heroic people to remain on their land and resist the attempt to just have them leave, kill them, or have them leave. That is a really huge, benefit to them, of huge support, as you're pointing out. And so the same thing is true every person we can help who are part of this kind of front against, imperial ambitions, is helping them continue to resist, to be resilient, to have the resources to maintain, survive, and do more than survive, but to resist. So I think that's a very important message. Tell us about some of those campaigns that you've created and been involved with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in early 2024, I did computer science. So I coded my own website for. You guys might have heard of Gaza funds. They verify campaigns for people in Gaza, and they put them on in one site. So it was inspired by that, and I created SudanFunds.com. So that was serious for me. I made sure to get the .com, not the .wordpress.net or something like that. It's the SudanFunds.com, like that, one word. And that's basically consistently updated. People might reach out to me with a campaign for us, like their own campaign, like a Sudanese family, people trying to escape, or a community kitchen that's serving Umdurman or Wed Medani, or Tawila for people who escaped Al Fasher, or like in Al Fasher before it fell for people who escaped Zamzam camp when the RSF had attacked that. So uh, I verify these campaigns, and there's like multiple levels of verification. And when I'm 100% sure that this is legitimate, and I do constant checkups with them, to make sure everything's okay and everything, and to maintain their presence on the website, and I just have these as links. So there's different categories. There's organizations that you can donate to on Sudan funds, and then there are people you can donate to on Sudan funds, and the money doesn't go to Sudan funds at all. It's just a list, basically, of like GoFundMe and Chuffed and different websites campaigns. We just host, give you a way to help multiple people in Sudan, or different. You have different options of people that you can help in Sudan. So that's number one. Number two is the Abu Huraira Aid Network. That's just like a mutual aid network that I also made just to try to help people in Gaza, but also help people in Sudan. So we have a team in Deir al-Balah and in Khan Yunis and Gaza, and we're expanding as we keep going, because we've only really received, like, so far we raised around $30,000. So we're expanding slowly in Gaza. So we have our own teams in Gaza who every week we try to raise enough money to send them enough to make these distributions. They go to the really neglected places, the orphans, the widows with many kids, the elderly who can't get up and go try to get food on their own. And we would give them like a bag with ingredients that would be enough to last them at least a week. Um, multiple bags if they have like multiple members of their families, like that kind of thing. And in Sudan, um, I we work with like underappreciated and underfunded community kitchens. Those are the ones that we were talking about before, that started during the revolution in 2018. We partner with these community kitchens, which is basically just like we're talking about, like some ammu or khaltu, like uncle or auntie's house, their kitchen. They're just people donate. Sometimes they donate meat, they might donate food, they might donate different things, and they just make food for the entire, like a whole neighborhood or a whole part of a city. And there are these things exist in multiple parts of each city in Sudan now. That's the only way most people are alive. And they even say when they're waiting in line, sometimes they say, when we come here, this is the only time we eat all day. Like, this is the only opportunity we have to get food. And these communications, we partnered with a couple of them. Before this, we were working with some in the fast share. I don't know what's gonna happen with that now. Honestly, the dust still hasn't settled, and like communication, there's a communication blackout. Like they usually hit the internet and the phones lines and the towers and stuff, and they even do that actually to try this, like, rent Starlink time. Like they might let you like text your family or whatever for a couple minutes on their Starlink, and if they let you do that, you also have to, like, yeah, like you be like, okay, oh, can you please send me like 3,000 Guinea, for example, 3,000 pounds. They make you send the amount, and then they'll be like, okay, so you're giving us like 75% of this. You get to keep 25, whatever money your family sends you, and we'll give you maybe 5 more minutes of the Starlink time. So that's one of the reasons, but communication blackout, so nobody can talk about it. the things that you guys all saw was not from victims and was not from Sudanese people. That it's from the RSF. All those videos in the fashion are from the RSF. The RSF posted it themselves. They took it themselves. They're very proud of what they're doing. But yeah, so the Abu Hurairah Network, the Sudan Funds, there's a Telegram channel you can look up that I run that there aren't really a lot of sources for Sudan in English that are consistent. So that posts I post news on there where I translate it from local Arabic sources and I post it in English. That's called the Sudan News. I'm not going to lie. I'm gonna have to check my phone right now to see exactly what it was called because I'm. It was like at first it was just a small thing and I didn't expect it to get so much attention. So I had to like change the name to something more. Yeah, so it's called the Sudan News Network. So you could look that up on Telegram and just like consistent like local like from all over in English and it's like not from Western media view, like what's
Right,
actually happening
right.
on the ground. Um so those are the most important ones
Okay.
in my opinion. There's a Khartoum Aid Kitchen. That's not mine, but I strongly recommend anyone who wants to donate to like grassroots organizations that feed people. And they don't only feed people now; they even people who were forced to be displaced and leave their land to other places. They're even helping them come back to Sudan to repopulate Sudan with the Sudanese people
Mm,
because another thing the RSF would do, like people don't consider this that it's some form of settler colonialism, but I genuinely think it is because most of the RSF now are fully just foreigners. It's like at least 50%, if not more. I mean, we're talking about Ethiopian, we're talking about people from Chad, we're talking about people from Central African Republic, we're talking about people from Libya, we're talking about people from Mauritania, different countries. The Sudanese embassy in Mauritania was actually taken over by the RSF without the Mauritanian government knowing for a while, and it was used as a recruitment center for RSF fighters. And they pulled a lot of North Africans from that. And as a North African, it's a really a shame to say, but some people will do anything for money, unfortunately.
well,
So
this is
that is,
what we're talking about, these mercenary networks. I mean,
yeah,
they're drawing from all over the region and beyond. So yeah, this is really important to hear about it in that respect. I'm going to ask you maybe after this stream to send me, a list of these things so that I can post them into the YouTube description and make these as widely available as possible. And I'll post them also on my social media because I really want people to hear about Sudan Funds, about Sudan News Network, and all you mentioned about a bunch of them. And I didn't get a chance to write them all down, but listeners do come back to the YouTube description. We will make sure to include these both in the YouTube episode description and when this episode gets posted on audio podcast on both East as a podcast and, Adnan Hussein Show podcast. We will make sure to include all of this information. It's absolutely vital that you get involved and do what you can. Um, Hamza, the audience has been posting how much they appreciate um, the analysis and the knowledge and the information. This has really been so valuable and informative for people. And inshallah, it's going to lead to more people knowing about what's really happening and analyzing it in a proper anti imperialist way and getting involved in continuing to get people to know about what's happening and to do things that they can to support in solidarity with the people of Sudan who have been, as you've pointed out in this article, involved in revolutionary action against the empire for 100 years. They are a central front. We need to be in solidarity and to support them. So I thank you so much for after work. It's a long day. You still came and you spent a good hour and a half speaking with people. It's so much appreciated, and we're with you and we're in solidarity, and jazakallah for all of the work that you're doing. Inshallah, there will be success for these efforts, inshallah.
and thank you so much for having me. Like truly, I really appreciate the opportunity. Big fan of the pod as well. So it was like I saw the DM from you. It was like a comment. a comment and then a DM. I was like, oh my god, Adnan Hussein. Of course, like I was very glad. I was very happy with the opportunity. I'm very thank you so much for having me on. Um, and yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. And inshallah, there will be success, and we like maybe even there can be in some point in the future some kind of a part two or something
Oh, I
like
was just
that.
going to say, this is not the last time we're going to have you on. Anytime you want to come on in the future, you have an open door. We want to keep hearing about what's happening in Sudan. And if you write like a new piece, come on, we'll talk about it. We'll make sure to link it and make sure people, even if they don't go read the piece, they hear about what you are saying in the piece. Let's make this this is not the last conversation. We being in solidarity means we will return, and we will return to remind people about this. So
Absolutely. And if somebody for when the YouTube video gets like officially posted of this,
mm,
I'm sure some people have like a lot of questions because there is a lot of context and nuance behind it. Like if they want to post it in the comments, I come with my regular personal account and answer some of them, a handful of them here and there. You guys please feel free to do so. I'd love to give more information and give more context, and I'd also love to. I'd be honored to come back on at some point in the future, inshallah, as well. And thank you so much for having me, Adnan.
okay, thank you. Well, listeners, watchers, before you drop off the stream, make sure to give it a like so more people will see it, will see it on their feeds, and you can still share it on X, tweet it, and tweet the link to the YouTube video as well. And when it comes out on audio podcasts, I know not everybody wants to watch on YouTube and so on. I will be tweeting out about it and make sure that it's widely known. And you can, send it to friends who like to listen on the podcast as well. Until next time, the Radical Academy is closed for just this evening, but we will be back next week with another topic, hoping to have another great guest from the Anti-Imperialist Scholars Collective, which is a wonderful new initiative that we want to learn more about. So do come back next week, and look out for the struggle session coming up in a couple of weeks, our monthly live stream panel with great guests together. And also check out, we will be recording very soon a new episode of The Names of God. You can't always just talk politics. You need to do something to feed your soul. So if you're interested, come, and we'll be doing an episode soon that should hopefully be out very soon on Ar-Rahman, right? And this is a world that could use more mercy, all of us to be more merciful to one another. So inshallah, we'll see you soon. Until next time, peace with justice and solidarity to you all.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.